If your entire research agenda got deleted tomorrow and you had to start over with just one idea, what's the one idea you'd keep and begin with?
Very intriguing question. I think the one idea that I would keep is so recently for a while now, I've been interested in, um, I've been interested in privacy and fairness, but also in approaching it in a way that makes sense from the machine learning perspective as well, not just because it's good to have fairness and it's good to have privacy. And the one thing that I've landed on is this idea of robustness. And when you build models that are robust with a specific robustness objective, it turns out that you get fairness kind of for free. So we did this for classification models, and now we're trying to look at this for more complex models like um, models, language models, vision language models, um, and looking at it from the perspective of what is being learned in the neural network itself. So it sort of also interfaces with interpretability in the sense that I want to look to see what is actually being learned. And then if we're being robust on that part, will that be sufficient for us to get what we want in the end, which is fairness? So I think that core idea of trying to use this robustness objective, but sort of everywhere in the training process, not just at the outputs, that's something that I would definitely keep and focus more on.
If we can go back to just, we'll call it first principles, but it's not really first principles, just like really raw definitions. What does
Mhm.
fairness, robustness, privacy, trust, what do these things mean in the context of AI? Not the technical understanding, but just if there was like a one sentence or couple sentence explanation, what are we trying to do?
Okay. So privacy these different terms touch on different things. Privacy is really touching on privacy when I'm talking about machine learning models, it touches on what can be inferred about an individual that they didn't want inferred, and that wasn't part of your original goal for that machine learning model. So maybe you're trying to recommend movies, but you are also able to infer their political views or sexual orientation. So that's a privacy matter. In the past, people have talked about privacy from the perspective of data privacy. How do I keep the actual data private? But now we're talking more about inferences and how these inferences can lead to privacy breaches. When it comes to fairness, it's really about the outcomes of these machine learning models, like, let's say predictions, that are then used for decision making. And you get unfair outcomes across different subgroups. And you get that because your model has different error rates, for example, across different subgroups. So you might have different demographics that are in the population that your data set is based on, and you may get different error rates. For example, image classification, maybe there's a higher error rate for Black women than there is for white men. So that's unfairness. Um, Robustness is really a more technical term about how robust your actual machine learning model is. And when we say robust, we mean robust to shifts. So for example, your data distribution has shifted. Maybe you've trained your model on data from 20 years ago, and the data distribution today looks different. You want to build models that are robust to such shifts. So that's really what people talk about when they talk about robustness. Trust is really like the perspective of um, someone who's either using the model or the model is used on them. And you want them to be able to trust the model so that it is maybe private or maybe fair. That really depends on the individual, like what they want to trust the model for.
Perfect. Thank you for those definitions. And just circling all the way back around, your focus now is on robustness, making the model robust.
And robust but with this goal of it also, the model also being now fair because we have made it robust.
Which leads me to the next question, which is, are those trade-offs, are there trade-offs going on here? Is there something where, if you make the model more privacy oriented, it gets less fair, vice versa? And if those things are true, how do you pick and choose who's the kind of oracle of truth there to make that model more robust or more private, etc.?
Yeah, there's definitely a trade-off. There's this concept of no free lunch, which applies to a lot of things like this, which means that if you want to make your model private, then the current methods that are optimal that we know to provide privacy will necessarily decrease your utility. And this utility might be accuracy, for example. So you will take a hit on accuracy. Of course, you don't, you have various methods people are proposing where the hit on accuracy is not as bad, maybe. But there is going to be some trade-off. And same thing with fairness. If you're trying to make two groups fair, then the average accuracy will go down and the accuracy for the majority group will go down, right? There has to be something that kind of tips the thing to make it more fair. Yes, there is a trade-off. There are people working on methods that are more optimal so that this trade-off is not so steep. But there will be some sort of trade-off. And even when it comes to robustness, even if robustness is a technical thing for the machine learning model to be more robust, there is something that you'll lose out on if you're being robust. Your average performance might be worse, but your model is going to be more robust for, future shifts, for example. And there's another trade-off that a lot of people don't talk about, but when it comes to robustness, there might be a little bit more of a computational cost. So it might be more expensive for you to do this. And who decides on the trade-off? Well, I mean, technically, practically speaking, it's a person that's designing the model or implementing it or deploying it. But really, it should be sort of all of us. We should all sort of have a say in that. If my data is being used for a model, then maybe I should have a say in what trade-off I'm comfortable with. Like how much am I willing to give up on privacy for a better accuracy or vice versa? So yeah, in practice, it's really the firm that's deploying this model or the machine learning scientist who's designing it who will decide on that trade-off. But um, generally speaking, philosophically speaking, it really should be all of us that should have a say in that.
Let's talk about philosophy just for a little bit. So compliance tells you what you can't do. Philosophy tells you what you should want. Policy kind of has to do both at once sometimes, and sometimes badly. Are you familiar with Canada's AI policy and policy apparatus?
A little bit. There has been some change. So we had some new the bill C-36, I believe, that I'm a little bit familiar with, but not a whole lot. It's quite new, and I haven't had time to go through it yet.
well, what are your? I mean, I'm not going to ask you obviously in-depth questions. You're not a policymaker, and that would just be inappropriate. But
Mhm.
let me just ask maybe more superficial questions, and you can choose which way to go. And I
Sure.
guess the biggest and broadest question is, what are we doing right and what can we improve on? I think that's the
Mhm.
first thing, just from your research perspective, and also maybe you have an idea of where AI should go or could go,
Mhm.
and will go. What are we doing correctly in terms of Canada's AI policy, and where can we improve just on that front?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, there's no actual policy except for the government's investment in AI, right? Like, so they have said that they want to invest in AI a lot more. But in terms of policy with respect to how AI tools are deployed, there really isn't anything right now. There's nothing that governs the privacy aspect, nothing that governs the fairness aspect or transparency or accountability. Um, so currently, there's actually nothing. there are some proposals like the Bill C-36 and so on. And there's some older ones, like there are these algorithmic impact assessment forms that have been developed, a couple of decades ago, I think. So those are in place. But they apply to different sectors. Some of these things apply to only the public sector, some apply to the private sector, and so on. So it's kind of not, there's nothing uniform. What I would like to see, did you ask me like what I would like to, where I'd like for it to go towards? That?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and create these AI policies and AI governance frameworks, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I think, well, oh, right. You asked me about what we did well in the past, right? So I do want to touch on that first. Um, so we've had these privacy commissioners, these Office of Privacy Commissioners for a while now. There's one at the federal level. There's some provinces have them, Alberta, BC, Quebec, Ontario. So some provinces have them. And I think those were done well. Those were implemented in a good way in the sense that these offices really did investigate when it comes to privacy breaches and so on. And they did a good job of it. There were a lot of, examples and case studies where, because of their investigations, things became known and things were fixed. But it's based on, a reactive scenario where there has to be something that has happened that then this office investigates. So I think what we should be doing is going more towards a scenario where we even avoid those privacy breaches. Um, and I think it's misleading for all of us to think of this as like one AI governance policy. And I really think we should think of it in terms of the application or the product. When you look at various other regulations and policies we've had, you know, across the world, it's always been on a product, right? Like, kids' toys, for example, or a clothing iron, or, like various things. It's been on the products, and I think that's what we should focus on. I think, saying AI governance, like generally speaking, is a big problem to tackle, and it might not even be the right problem. So, for example, there might be an AI model that works that's being implemented for, I don't know, predicting how many cars go through a certain intersection in a day, for example. But it might also be useful, like the same underlying foundational model might also be useful for predicting um, how many people are coming through the emergency room, in the emergency department. But the impact is obviously very different, right? Like here in the first case, we're only counting the number of cars and, maybe time of day, things like this. We're not looking at license plates, or anything like that, right? There's not a lot of um, inadvertent side impacts. But in the other case, in the case where we might be trying to predict occupancy in emergency room, we might be looking at a lot of detail. Like there might be a case that relates to a heart condition that takes a longer time compared to a wound that needs to be, bandaged, right? And in doing so, we're collecting a lot of information about individuals. And so you might need to be a little bit more cautious about who's has access to the data, who's using the model, and who's looking at the outcomes. So it might be the same classification model at the base, but the impact is different because of how it's used. So you can't just say all classification models should have a certain regulation on them, because that wouldn't be fair. So I think we should really think about, separate products, sectors, and so on, something that a construction company is using for material resiliency or something like that is going to have a very different impact than, healthcare data being used, but the underlying model might be the same. So I really think we should be going more towards specific products and sectors rather than just AI in general, because it makes no sense to say, let's just regulate AI. Right? Like it's not one thing. You can't say, for example, let's just regulate all computers or all technology. Well, it depends on what is the technology doing. So I think we should be going more towards this sort of specific particular cases.
I've asked this question on the podcast many times, but it's always great to ask it again because I get different answers all the time. But you've worked in AI for a very long time before it was cool, right? Before it was, this ChatGPT hype,
Mhm.
incredible, we're going to the moon and Mars and stuff. Um, how did the field change when all of this hype and investment and interest and noise flooded in? Did that distract you? Was that welcome opportunity and investment? Has it changed the fundamental behavior of what you're doing day to day, and maybe even the specific focuses of what you're able to do day to day? Like, how did that affect you?
Yeah, I think everyone would agree that November 2022, everything changed. Um, um, I think there's going to be a lot of positives and negatives about any change, right? Any change will have positives and negatives. And sometimes they're sort of intermeshed and you kind of don't know one particular thing, what is the positive and is that really a negative or is that a positive, right? And I think, for all of these language models and ChatGPT type of tools that have been unleashed since November 2022, I mean, the one positive thing is that people are learning more about AI, I think, because of this, right? Maybe it's just through their use of these chatbots, but they're kind of, it's a little bit more, I hate to use this word, but democratized in a sense, where it's become a little bit more public. People are but the negative aspect of that same thing is that we may not have enough AI literacy to actually know what to do with it. So while it's great that we all have access to it, like we don't know what to do with it, right? It's kind of like maybe you had like a manual screwdriver and suddenly you have this super powered electric tool and you know you still don't know how to use a screwdriver. Like what are you going to do with this, power tool? Um, so I think we need to sort of catch up on that part, on the AI literacy part, so that we actually know how to use these well. Um, in terms of industry, I think it's changed a lot, again, in positive and negative ways. When I was at the Amy Upperbound conference in May this year, I talked to a few industry people, and for some of them, it's been great. They're doing a lot of cool things like um, trying to figure out how to, in construction, trying to figure out how to plan certain things like conduits and wires and all of this, which can be very complex. And so they have, these high-performing tools that are very helpful for the engineering aspects of their work, and I think that's great. Of course, the negative side of this is that we still need to understand the basics of it to know if what we're getting from these AI tools is useful and good in the way that we want them to be. For example, in software engineering, yeah, it's great that we can just, interface with one of these models like Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot and say, hey, can you give me a script that does this very quickly? And then it'll do that, and that's great. But we also know about stories where when you've done it for, a larger piece of code, people have found, oh, there can inadvertently be some security risks. All right, like we've all seen these case studies pop up in the news and stories. So, it's good, but also, taken to the extreme, it's not great. And the thing that can help us sort of navigate these two is an understanding, we can't, when we're talking about using it for software programming, we can't forget how to program and what is a good, efficient, software, what does it look like so that we know how to sort of question what AI is giving us. So there's been like benefits and disadvantages. In terms of research, yeah, it has definitely. Um, made me question a lot of things because sometimes I think, oh, well, this is an interesting problem because we need to find an efficient solution for it and all this. And then boom, there's something that can be done with AI. Like there's nothing that I need to do about it. So it can on the surface, I think I'm still grappling with it, to be honest with you. There are aspects where I think, okay, I don't know, does it make sense for me to still work on this problem? Because maybe this can just easily be solved by AI. But then the counter argument to that is yes, but these are humongous trillion parameter models that are using a lot of energy in the training, and not everyone has access to it. So maybe there is something, maybe there is a part where my research will matter. And then there's the counter argument that yes, but if these are the models that are flooding the industry, then would it even matter that I came up with this more efficient tiny model that performs well for this specific purpose? So it kind of it does put us in question a lot about, you know, are we doing something right? Should I change what I'm doing? But the thing with research is usually it's best to have this long-term vision. And I don't think my long-term vision has changed. So my long-term vision is still to create more robust, fair, and private models. That is still there. But maybe how I get there is now changing because, oh, okay, no one's using these simple models anymore. People are using these trillion parameter models. Okay, what can I do in this context now? Still keeping my long-term research vision in sight. So I think maybe some things that I'm doing in the short term change a little bit, but um, my long-term and overall research agenda is still the same. But yeah, the path to get there is going to change, and that's going to be a little bit little bit of a disruption, which concerns students especially because grad students have a goal of a job at some point. They're going to finish their master's or their PhD and either go into academia or industry or something. So they want to make sure that they're learning the right things. Um, if they're um, you know, if they focus on something that's too much of an application or applied thing, that might not be relevant tomorrow. So, we have to plan, my students' research a little bit more carefully because it's important that they learn the tools and methods rather than, just focusing on the applied part. So, yeah, things have changed a bit, I would say, but not in the long term. I would say more sort of the short-term goals have changed.
I want to walk back just a handful of minutes. Why do you hate the word democratizing in the context of AI?
Because it's not really democratizing. It kind of looks like it is, right? Like, oh, here's a nice interface, ChatGPT, that talks to you like it's a person, has these three little dots like it's thinking, and, makes you feel like, oh, look, I have access to this cool AI. But it's not really because I don't know, as a generic public person, I don't know how this is working. I don't really have control over it. It's a humongous company that has spent a lot of resources on building this, and I'm just there to use it. Like, and I might actually even be the product because in my interaction, there's something that the model might be learning as well. So it's not really democratizing because I have some access to this new tool and I can do something. I don't really have agency though. And I think, that word democratizing must include this idea of agency.
So now I'm a little confused. I'm saying confused, I'm being exaggerative, but I'm confused at what would democratized AI actually look like? Would it be, I'm just riffing right now, would it be something where I can go in and kind of see an audit trail of how it's thinking, the data it's pulling, how it's coming to a conclusion? It's, and again, this is sci-fi or more just not realistic, but it would be me looking at the chatbot or whatever and saying, oh, okay, it knows that it is biased towards these 7 areas. What does democratized look like, number one? And number two, is that possible?
That's a good question. What does democratized look like? And I think you hit a couple of points there, which is transparency, about transparency and sort of accountability in a way where if I'm using this chatbot, then is there some way I can know how it was built and what it was using in its training data? If I'm asking it, questions about, I don't know, I'm a student and I'm asking questions about English literature, but it was really trained on Russian literature, I should know that. Um, things, little things like this. But also, um, I would say, um, having a say in how it was built and how it's used would also go into this concept of democratized AI. And I don't know that a large swath of the population does have a say right now. Are they properly represented? When it comes to a tool that's interacting with people, then, the people should be properly represented, right? So for me, democratizing includes that it's the appropriate representation of people and context and the environment. Um,
So can I just double click on this just
mhm,
for a second? Because we're in a really interesting space and place in a conversation where I don't think I've ever been in. Let me try to tie a lot of things together. So we talked about the privacy, we talked about robustness, we talked about this research space is evolving and changing. There's a lot of things happening, and now we got to this point of democratized AI, which is a completely different perspective on the word and the term and the idea than what is being pushed out by the Anthropics and the open AIs. They want to just have this fluffy definition of, oh, we built a product and everybody can use it, so it's democratized. We're talking about something much more in depth and streamlined, almost like it's for the commons, for example.
mhm.
So, what is stopping us from allowing or putting kind of like AI on the ballot, so to speak? Is that something that is, again, realistic? Is that something that should happen? For example, I think that a lot of parents in particular would have been more adept and more focused on their children's social media usage if it was a core part of elections and core part of like the voting process. Not that you would use social media to vote, but it would be a part of what you were thinking about. I think having something or inputting something into the conversation 10 years down the line, it's a little too late, especially
Mhm.
since my girlfriend's little sister, who is 6, cannot sit at the dinner table without her phone. It's terrifying.
Mhm.
So, in the same way, should we start having a national conversation on AI? Not for the investment opportunity. I understand for the majority of people in the space that investment is everything, like cash is king. I get it. But there is a broader conversation to be had on what we are doing with AI and what it is doing to us. That being said, go ahead.
I mean, I think that any conversation that we have must be an informed conversation. So, and that's really, this is, we're kind of dancing around this word democracy, right? And it's kind of really difficult in a democracy to make sure that these public conversations are informed conversations, as we know from a lot of issues, right? Um, as an aside, for example, the referendum about to happen in Alberta, there's a lot of uninformed, conversation is great, but it needs to be informed. Um, so I think it's hard to say, like, should AI be on a ballot? It's really hard to um, answer a question like this because I don't know that we are sufficiently informed yet to know what about the AI should be on the ballot. So I think that I think there has been a lack of sort of oversight from people who have been in who are in power. And that's why we're at this situation now where we're 10 years too late in looking at, the impact of social media on kids. All right. And this idea of democratizing AI, this notion is not new, right? People talked about this when the internet first came out. Someone said this, and I can't remember. I can't remember who it was, so I can't find the right reference. But someone recently talked about how that was the promise of internet, that it was going to be democratizing. Everyone's going to be able to use it. You can all put all of your information, whatever, on the internet, just like anybody else can, and so on. But we now know that that's not necessarily true anymore, right? Like it's a very capitalistic thing, the internet right now. So that's the same thing with AI. We can claim that we want to democratize AI, but what does that really mean? It's still a few companies that are still in control of what kind of AI gets put out there for people to use, right? So when I say representation, I don't necessarily mean that every adult or every eligible voter should have a vote on AI or should be able to vote what should be regulated and so on. I mean that there isn't enough representation at these um, power tables. That's what I mean, is that it's not that, every single person, we should have a referendum on every single thing regarding AI, but there's not enough representation, and we need to do a better job of that. Who's we? I don't know. I guess the people in power, but that's kind of hard to tell people to self-regulate.
Interesting. We have already brought up AI literacy, but we brought it up in a different context. Now we're talking about kind of national AI literacy in some way, to help people make informed decisions. You don't want people to, ban meat, for example, because they think that it causes cancer or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
bad example, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
It's just we want people to make decisions from the goodness of their heart, but also from a place where they are understanding what decisions are being made, and it's not based off of flawed or false data. So, what does that look like? Not just in the sense of what does an informed populace look like, because I think that only lives in up here,
Mhm.
but also what would it take to inform? Now, I also agree with you. I don't think that I will say this. I'm not going to pretend or put words in your mouth. So I'm saying this from my perspective. I also don't think that the folks in power right now have any bloody clue how to inform the populace. But on the flip side, I would also say that the populace has no idea how to be informed.
Yeah, right.
Where does that gap exist in your mind? And again, I get queasy kind of talking about this because it feels like there's like this Christ complex of we can save people and we're not saying that,
Mhm.
but we're also trying to figure out, is there a way to allow people to enter a building of their own sovereignty to make better decisions for their own sovereignty? That's kind of meta, but where does your mind go on this?
I think this is a complex issue. I think I think first, our representatives and those who are making decisions need to be better informed. I think they haven't caught up to the pace of AI, right? Like, I think that AI has advanced so quickly that those who are responsible for regulation or representing our interests, in government or even, you know, non-governmental places like large companies, not of all of our interests are represented there. I think there's a definite lag there, with respect to how AI has advanced. So, and even education, if you look at, our education system hasn't caught up to AI in the sense of how we should be informing people about AI. Like, kids should be learning about data and statistics at a very young age because that's an important part of AI. And we haven't really done that. And our cycle of how we um, update our systems I'll say it in a very technical way, update our systems, is very slow compared to how AI has been advancing. So we need to do something about that. It's great to be responsible and take our time with regulation and all of this, but we also need to recognize that things are moving at a faster pace now, and we need to do a better job of, we as in, people in power need to do a better job in informing themselves you know, um, and making these decisions. Um, I think it's complex. It's really hard. It's really easy to sort of sit here and talk about it and say they need to be informed, our education system needs to be better. But putting these things in place is really hard. Like, we're talking about changing systems, right? And that typically takes years, generations. And unfortunately, we're at this time where we're not synchronized with the thing that we want to learn about and regulate and our ways of doing it. We're just not synchronized.
Yeah, I'm just riffing, but it makes me think about the have you seen The Office, the TV show?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you remember when Dwight was having that battle with the computer and he was using, like, when they just launched like Dunder Mifflin Infinity,
Yeah.
and um, Dwight is a paper salesman and he was having this battle with the computer and he won, but he had used every
Yeah.
single card in his deck
Yeah.
for just 8 hours. And in the back of your mind, the dramatic irony is that, like, you realize the computer can do this forever.
Yeah.
Whereas Dwight, after that day, Dwight has literally no more cards in
Exactly.
his deck.
Right. He won
And
that
so,
battle, but that was it.
exactly,
Yeah.
he's not going to win the
Yeah.
war, right? And so, that, to me, I abstract that and apply to what we're talking about right now in terms of, like, social media won out against, like, traditional advertising, or easier example, the internet won out against newspapers, right? I don't even know what a newspaper looks like anymore other than searching it online. Like, I don't think I've held a newspaper physically in a decade,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't exist to me. So what I'm trying to explain is that we already understand that when certain forces that are more frictionless arrive, the other forces that maybe are more physical or more brick and mortar, they kind of decay or cease to exist. And so I think that we're coming to a moment, or maybe we've already crossed or fallen into the void in this, or crossed the precipice, however you want to call it. I don't think we're standing at the precipice yet, where this digital age, whether it's social media and AI, or a combination of these things, is interacting with the legacy systems of our government that are failing to catch up. And we have to choose how to move forward, because if we continue to rely on governance systems that are trying to govern a technology that doesn't exist anymore, we're only going to be putting ourselves in the same boat every single time, and people are suffering. Again, that's not a question. You can comment on that if you would like, but I'm seeing now exactly the issue is that it's not just the technology per se and what it's doing, but it's our ability to adapt to an ever-changing world.
Hmm.
It's very, very again, there's no symbiosis. It's
Yeah.
we're chugging along two parallel tracks. One is going to end. It's not going to be the digital technology.
And I think I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak like I know something about everything, but it feels to me that, we need to, in situations like this, we sort of need to focus on what we can do best to, um, interface with this, whether it's for regulating it, for the good, for handling it, for managing it, controlling it, whatever. And that might be, the community building part, right? Like I think, individuals can sit around and complain or, or say, well, yeah, it's, the government's job, they should have done this. Yeah, they should have, but they didn't. But what have we done in the past when that has happened is we've, built community and worked that way. And I think that maybe that's what's not happening, yet for this in this situation, and maybe that's because our attention's just so divided into so many different things. Oh gosh, it's the economy. Oh, there's a war over there on the other side of the world, and oh, gas is expensive, groceries expensive. I got to think about all of this. Do I also now have to think about AI? You know,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
think
it's too much.
it's a lot of things in people's plates, but I think having some sort of like a community-led effort to do something to inform people, to inform the government, to inform our representatives, I think that's really what we can do as just normal, regular people, right? Those who are not at the table. And maybe that needs to happen and hasn't sufficiently yet. Because these regulations about you know uh, children and the use of social media, people who know technology have known for a long time that yes, these algorithms have a specific goal and they're optimized for a specific goal, and that doesn't correspond with what we might want. But that information wasn't really that available to everyone else that would start some sort of a community to get this message further up the chain, right? So I don't know. Yeah, I guess we need something like a community that needs to community building sort of that needs to happen.
And if you had a magic wand and you could solve any of these problems, what would you change and why? What is the fundamental thing that is missing right now? Is it this community, or are we like 5 steps forward and we need to start very, very small or in a different area entirely?
I don't know. That's tough. I think it's always harder to start something new entirely, and which might sound like it would be the right thing to do, but we can really only move forward what we're in at the moment. Um, I don't know. I don't know. If I had a magic wand, what was the one thing I could do? Uh, I don't know. I mean, asking wishes of genies is always a dangerous thing.
Yeah, yeah, especially after watching Obsession, I'm scared of any wishes going wrong.
Yeah.
Let me ask you an easier one. What gives you hope in the world?
People, especially young people, start realizing things, like they start asking questions. And that's what gives me hope is that, humans have always had this need to ask questions of why and can I change this, right? And I think that is, inside every human is this notion of agency. And I think that that's what gives me hope is that people will question things, and people as a whole, maybe there are individuals who are less able to do that, but I think people as a whole, we'll find a solution to this. But I think we need to accept the fact that it'll be a different solution than what we currently think is the ideal solution. I think, I mean, as people, we will find a solution to all of this, but we might want to think about what is not necessarily of what is the ideal thing that should happen now, but how can this move in a way that I'm okay with rather than scrap this and start with this ideal thing.
I love it. Nidhi, thank you so much for being on the program. Where can we find you online to keep up with your work?
I have a terrible online presence. I stopped engaging on Twitter when it started becoming a little bit toxic.
So
So
in 2013. Okay, for sure.
yeah. Um, I am trying to update my website right now, and I kind of am on LinkedIn, but I don't post things. I'm more of an absorber than a broadcaster.
Gotcha. Well, in other words, you're just really, really cool and you don't have time to update the folks that are chronically online, like myself. So I get it. I understand. Nidhi, again, thank you so much for being here and I hope to have you on the program very
Well,
soon.
thank you for the conversation. It was very thought-provoking.